Good afternoon and welcome to the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce annual legislative session briefing. I'm Peter Lorenz, board chairman of the Greater Albuquerque Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank each of you for joining us for today's virtual event. We're pleased to bring the business community together today to hear directly from Charles Sallee, Director of the Legislative Finance Committee, as we prepare for what promises to be a consequential session. Today's conversation focuses on New Mexico's finances and economy ahead of what will be a very important and a very busy 30-day legislative session beginning next month in January. Understanding where we stand fiscally and economically will be critical as our state leaders make decisions that will impact businesses, families, and communities across New Mexico. As we head into this session, our state budget continues to break new ground. We predict we may hit 11 billion, with still billions more in surplus projected ahead. Oil and gas prices and production remain high, driving growth across the state's revenue streams. But we also know they will not last forever. The macroeconomic factors affecting oil and gas are unpredictable. What goes up will eventually come down, and we just don't know when. Many experts remind us that there is a finite volume of oil that can be pulled from the ground. How long will we continue at this pace? It's a finite resource, and that reality must inform our planning. Yet, even with the unprecedented revenues, significant challenges persist. Finding qualified workers remains a struggle for employers throughout our state. Student achievement data continues to paint a troubling picture, affecting our workforce development efforts and our ability to recruit new companies and skilled professionals to New Mexico. And it doesn't take 6 degrees of separation to find someone in our circle here who has been hurt by property or violent crime. Come January, our governor, Senate, and House will once again have real opportunities to make spending decisions that could make transformative changes in these areas. The resources are there. The question is whether we will use them wisely. But it will be essential to lay out what changes are needed and why. How can we make those billions of dollars count now and for future generations? How can we ensure these year after year windfalls are put in places that will solve our biggest challenges? We must ask ourselves, with all the money we've spent during this windfall from oil and gas, can we say education is better, that our road infrastructure has improved, that our children are safer, have reduced poverty? These questions suggest that increased funding is not sufficient, that we must also ensure that the right structures and policies are in place. These are the questions that should guide our leaders in this session. And these are the conversations that Charles Sallee will help us navigate today. Before we get started, I would like to also recognize some great companies and organizations who are sponsoring today's event. So they are PNM President and CEO Don Terry, New Mexico Mutual President and CEO Kelly Mixon, City of Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller, Bernalillo County Manager Cindy Chavez, and UNM President Garnett Stokes. Albuquerque Public School Superintendent Dr. Gabriela Blakey, CNN President Tracy Hartzler, and French Funerals President and CEO Tom Antrim. Blue Cross Blue Shield New Mexico President Janice Torres, Excellent Schools New Mexico Executive Director Scott Heidman, and Comcast Vice President Chris Dunkson. And it's myself, UNREC CEO Peter Lorenz, New Mexico Gas Company President Ryan Schell, Chalmers Ford General Manager Andy Stribet. And then we have United Supermarkets, that's Albertson's Regional Vice President Carlos Hernandez, Bohannon Houston President CEO Bruce Stidworthy, and Bank of Albuquerque, New Mexico Market CEO Carl Bleasley. James Corporation President CEO Chad James, Touro College and Dental Medicine Dean Dr. Ronnie Myers, and Chevron Senior State Government Affairs Representative Patrick Killen. And then we have Sunny 505 CEO Desiree Garcia, New Mexico Oil and Gas President and CEO Missy Courier, and Presbyterian Healthcare Service Executive VP and COO Dr. Rishi Sika. And then on our last slide here, we have Fidelity Investments, VP of Public Affairs, Leanne Kravitz, Molina Healthcare, Plan President Carolyn Ingram, and we also have the Daniels Fund supporting us here today. Thank you to these great sponsors for their engagement and generosity. We appreciate each and every one of you. Now, next, I'd like to welcome our Chamber President and CEO, Terry Cole, to introduce our featured speakers.
Thank you, Peter. And I couldn't agree with more with everything you said in your opening. From a budget standpoint, I don't imagine anyone could have predicted that we now have a state budget of over 11 billion, with billions in revenue still to come. And I echo your point, the business community, and in fact, all residents, are really counting on the state to set the right priorities and make changes we've needed to make for quite some time on everything from taxes and infrastructure to public education, public safety, and workforce development. It's not to say the state hasn't focused on our challenges, but most would agree that we need to do more, dig deeper, think bigger to accelerate solutions to these challenges. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Jeremy Oswald, Senior Vice President and Market President of Citizens Bank, to introduce our keynote speaker. Citizens Bank is an effective leader in New Mexico, and Jeremy chairs our Leadership Albuquerque program. So Jeremy, it's all yours.
Hey, thank you, Terry. As someone who has spent many years in the banking community here in New Mexico, I, like all of you, follow our state's financial strength and the fiscal challenges really closely, both on behalf of our customers and to track the broader growth and economic opportunities within our state. We're particularly interested in the work of the Legislative Finance Committee as it relates to the challenges we all care very deeply about. Those include education and public safety. So today is a real privilege to speak with a state budget expert about what we can do to set New Mexico on a better path. So let's jump in. Charles Sallee is the director of the New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee. He's here with us today to talk state finances. On behalf of the legislature, Charles oversees the construction of the budget, keeps the legislators apprised of fiscal and economic developments in the state, and leads a staff of program evaluators who analyze the effectiveness of various programs within the state government. Charles is in his third year of leading the LFC. He's previously served as the Legislative Finance Committee's Deputy Director for 13 years and also as a Program Director and Evaluator in the Roundhouse for 5 years prior to that. Some of his work has led to major policy changes or cost savings across the areas like Medicaid, higher education, adult and juvenile corrections, public schools, and workers' compensation. Mr. Sallee grew up here in New Mexico and earned a bachelor's of social work from New Mexico State University and a master's in social work and administration from Texas State University in San Marcos. I'd also like to personally thank Charles and his team on behalf of the Chamber for hosting the Leadership Albuquerque program with a session every year up in Santa Fe. So Charles, thanks for that. And then I'll also share that after Charles presents, he'll take some questions from our board and from many of you. During his presentation, if you'd like to pose a question, please just type it in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. Welcome, Charles. The floor is yours, and thank you again.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Terry, and everybody for having me. Let's get started. Next slide. So this is my favorite slide. It shows our general fund roller coaster. And we constructed this going back to the mid-1960s. And this is the line on the graph is year over year percent revenue growth, and the blue bars are percent change in appropriations and spending. And so you can see in the late 60s and 70s, the budget was exploding in growth. That's when our oil production really was first coming online, and it was before the state started putting some of those big influx of revenues into our permanent funds. And I ask myself when I walk around state institutions, including our higher ed institutions, how we were able to do so much building of our college campuses and other state assets during the 1970s. And it was because oil was just booming and the revenues were booming. Then a big crash And so these ups and downs are all really tied towards a couple of the normal economic cycle changes in the broader economy nationally, but mostly tied to the boom and bust of oil prices. And I'll talk why it was prices and not necessarily production a little bit later. Next slide. Oh, you can also access this graph along with the revenue estimate on our homepage. If you want to know how much money we're bringing in by individual revenue streams, such as I get a lot of people asking how well we're being helped out by the cannabis tax, and it's like $30 million, not very much. You can dig into that level of detail. Our general fund revenue is our main discretionary account. There are other earmarked accounts, like when you pay your gas taxes at the pump, that's going to go into the road fund. That's the biggest earmarked revenue. But the legislature tends to focus a lot on its general discretionary income that comes from things like gross receipts taxes and personal income taxes. There's a lot of complicated revenues that come into our general fund, but I think of them in three big buckets. The first are revenue streams tied to our broader economic prosperity. That's going to be personal income tax, gross receipts taxes as good examples. The second are direct energy revenues. Those are things that are very volatile, and about a third, some years, almost 40% of our general fund revenue would be tied directly to energy revenues. There's some other indirect energy revenues that are built into gross receipts taxes. For example, when oil companies are drilling, they're buying services and equipment, paying that. But the direct energy, like federal mineral leasing payments that we get from the federal government for drilling on federal lands, is the example of that. And the third, really growing and important pot of money to the general fund is our investment income. And this comes from our permanent funds. The permanent fund for public schools flows through the general fund, and that's how we help fund public schools. That's about $700 to $800 million. The severance tax permanent fund is a growing and really important investment income that will come into the state general fund over the next decade at historically high levels. The revenues tied to our general economic prosperity, and we'll show this a little bit later as well, have been the strength in those revenues have been pushed back out into the economy already by the legislature in the form of tax cuts. There's been other earmarks for specific purposes, like some of the money you pay on health insurance premiums dedicated to a program to help subsidize health insurance premiums for folks on the exchange. But all of that strength has been taken out of the general fund and pushed back into the economy largely over this administration. The second, energy revenues, that we'll see this too, have essentially been capped by the legislature, where the legislature said, we're not going to build in the long-term bubble that we're forecasting from energy revenues. We're going to cap this, and anything above those amounts will go into our early childhood trust fund. It'll go into our Medicaid trust fund, newly created, and behavioral health trust fund. Those will be capitalized over the next 3 years. And most importantly, the most money will be going into our severance tax permanent fund. If we play our cards right, by the end of the decade, our investment income will outpace our direct energy revenues coming into the legislature. And you can imagine if you had an endowment fund or a permanent fund, that kind of revenue stream coming off of a 5-year average of the corpus is much more stable than the boom and bust that we saw on the previous slide for oil and gas. Next slide. The revenues have been booming under this administration, so much so that spending is up almost 80%. These are some of these areas for like commerce and industry. They have a small base, so a larger growth. But public schools, over 70% increase in spending going back to FY19. Same thing, health, hospitals, and human services. That's where CYFD is going to be, Medicaid, Human Services Department. Early childhood, massive expansion of services to a basically universal pre-K, which we've shown has positive effects, particularly for low-income kids, all the way through college going rates, high school graduation rates. not a silver bullet, but a good investment. Alternatively, big investments in childcare assistance, which is more of an income support program, not necessarily going to see good outcomes on that for kids participating in the educational arena as a good example. Next slide. Here you can see a number of the impact and growing impact in the out years. This is from our August revenue forecast of a variety of different tax code changes that have been put forth by the legislature over the next couple of years. So we're facing about more than $1 billion in foregone revenue that's been pushed back out into the economy, largely over the past couple of legislative sessions. Next slide. So here's the crux. Oil and gas has been driving the majority of this growth. Any economic prosperity coming out of COVID in particular has been pushed back out into the economy. Spending is up significantly. Where does that leave us? That leaves us still with a sizable surplus. We predict through the end of the decade, beginning of the next decade, depending on how much the legislature's gross recurring spending. But if revenue growth in the midterm to the long term is estimated to be between 0 and 3%, the legislature had been spending at a clip of about 15%, brought that down this last legislative session to 6%. Even by my Aggie math, that's not sustainable over the long term if growth is only 3% on the high end. So something's got to give, because when we were putting together budgets under the Martinez administration on a good year, those were growing about 4%. And there was a lot of political consternation that was too much austerity. So if we want to have government services, which are largely, education's largely funded by the state, almost all of it for K-12, unlike other states where locals share in property tax. The state in New Mexico is funding all of schools. Higher education, we're one of the top finance state-supported higher ed systems in the country. We got to figure out how to make our economy much more prosperous. And so the legislature's been, the Legislative Finance Committee and its budget guidelines been focusing on a narrower set of priorities maybe than what we had in the past. The big three are, how do we make our state more prosperous? And that starts with how do we increase people's per capita earned income, not transfer payments, welfare payments, but earned income. And to have a population with higher earned income, you got to have people with much higher levels of educational attainment than what we have in our state. Everything from trades to PhDs, all above in New Mexico is what's needed. And they got to be working. We have far too many people that are underemployed for a variety of reasons. We have far too many people that are simply not participating in the workforce. The good news is, over the past couple of years, our personal per capita income has been growing faster than the national average. And it's been one of the better growth rates nationally. The second is focusing on access to high quality healthcare, including behavioral healthcare. So that's been major investments in that particular arena to ensure that folks of all walks of life can get access to high quality healthcare. We're really struggling with that right now. We did secret shopper work this interim for our Medicaid program and found that it was very difficult to get appointments in a timely manner for folks for a variety of basic services. I know we've all kind of felt that, even if we're not on Medicaid as well. The third bucket that the committee is focused on are things that improve the quality of our lives and our communities. And that can be anything from having nice amenities. There's been a project that the legislature's funded for regional recreation and quality of life grants, where we've seen communities like Deming build a new water park, basically a lake with a playscape for kids. That's a retirement community that's trying to shift to make things nice for families to want to live and stay in the community. Parks, rodeo arenas, all across the state, as an example. It can include clean drinking water. We've got far too many very small drinking water systems that are struggling to deliver clean drinking water to our communities. We have real opportunities to make inroads with these surpluses. And then finally, another good example of quality of life investments are making sure that we've got safe neighborhoods. We know that's a priority of the chamber. So we got to make these investments count. We can't have everything be a priority. We got to narrow the focus. We got to make sure it's going to be a good return on investment for taxpayers. And the biggest challenge that we've observed since this boom has really started and before is the states and local governments and schools struggles to effectively implement and use these resources. That's why I'm so big on leadership programs, where we just see in the public sector not enough strong leadership to execute the vision that both the governor and the legislature have to do big things. And I'll talk later about an exciting project at UNM where when you have that good leadership and when you have the kind of vision and we have the resources that we're going to put together, we have the opportunity to have one of the best medical school complexes in the entire country and medical school training programs in the entire Southwest easily over the next 3 to 4 years. Next slide. Okay, so we've been booming and we've been warning about the possibility of things slowing. We were beating the revenue estimates by revenues were coming in high all of last year. Since January of this year, we've fallen short every month, and we're tracking below what the revenue estimates for the current fiscal year were off through September by at least $100 million. A lot of this is being driven by the national economy and uncertainty in that particular area. We're seeing employment starts slow down to very low levels. We're flying blind right now because we don't have good data out of Washington because of the government shutdown. So the economists doing the revenue estimate this past month didn't have the most recent kind of data that we normally rely on. And that's going to be a challenge going into the session. Next slide. So even if revenues are slowing, I'm not optimistic about a good revenue outlook next week on Monday, but I'm not so pessimistic as to say the sky is falling either. And partly that is because we do things like stress testing the risk of both the upside and the downside to the revenue. And what the legislature has been doing is having a more regular, appropriate growth rate in the underlying recurring budget, using the surplus on big non-recurring items that can be hopefully transformative. And if revenues dip because of, let's say, a shock in oil prices, or even worse, a shock in oil production, the first places that are going to get hit are going to be those trust funds that we've set up. So we've insulated the general fund from the most volatile revenue sources that we've got, where in May, I was looking at a revenue scenario of losing $3 billion, and I was sleeping fine. And you're like, well, how in the world could that be? Losing like $1 billion in Medicaid, losing, another $1 billion in oil money, and losing another $1 billion in oil revenue. And it was because we've cushioned ourselves so well that it's like, okay, we don't do $3 billion of non-recurring spending. Maybe we only do 1.5. We won't feel the full effects of the oil. We're not going to have to go in and change the school's budget. That's just how much work this legislature has done to kind of give us more stability. Think about how when you run your business, you don't want to have that graph at the very beginning. It's impossible for you to be strategic and think where you want to be 3 to 5 years from now. And yet that's the way state government's been run for the last 40 years. Worried about the next 6 months, not worried about how to make sure this year's cohort of pre-K kids are going to come out the best prepared to compete in a world economy 13 years from now. Next slide. A lot of exposure. We did a lot of work this interim on federal revenue changes. It turns out when you hear folks talk about H.R. 1, the bill that Congress passed, the reconciliation bill, when Congress does those things, they're dealing in 10-year windows. And they're dealing with changes to what are called the baseline spending growth. So there's assumptions like for Medicaid, that Medicaid would grow 4 to 5% a year. And if they make policy changes to make Medicaid grow 3%, in Washington, that is deemed a cut. Here, it's deemed like slowing growth down. A cut would be your revenue is lower year over year than the previous year, but that's how Washington operates. And so these turn out to be big numbers because they're over a 10-year period, and they turn out to be more manageable, and I think the general public and certain the media will let on. The biggest problem and the biggest risk is the annual federal budget deficit of $4 trillion, and this bill adding $350 billion to it a year. That's the bigger challenge fiscally for us as a country when we're going in the opposite direction of trying to balance that out. Next slide. Okay, oil production in New Mexico for like 40 years came in at about 70 million barrels of oil a year, like clockwork. And then when we had the last oil bust in 2016 through 2017, 2018, new drilling techniques, investments, big changes in Southeast New Mexico resulted in a boom in oil production to the tune of, I think last year, we produced over 700 million barrels of oil. That's just an incredible growth rate. You know, a lot of these discussions you see in the national media of needing to open up new oil fields off of the coast of California or in Alaska or those types of things. I think that's, well, there's a variety of reasons why they're talking that, but really our oil play in Southeast New Mexico is one of the top 3 in the world. When it peaks, when it plateaus, depending on which industry economist you talk about, all of them tend to agree that that peaking or plateauing is moving up rapidly. It's moved up, you know, because of the war in Ukraine and how Europe was transitioning its economy quickly to more new renewables. Those are going to be caused by not lack of oil in the ground over the long term in Southeast New Mexico, but because of decarbonization and other types of policy and economic changes. So the good news is that peak is not built into coming into the general fund to fund schools as it's pulled out of the ground. It'll fund schools and other types of things after it's invested and brings returns. Next slide. Okay, the recurring budget. This is kind of like my Goldilocks scenario for the committee. 10% budget growth, you know, and I'm constantly asked, well, can we do a tax package? Can we grow spending by X percent? And it's like, think of spending either through the tax code or through House Bill 2, the main budget bill, as the same. If you're going to increase spending by some percentage, you know, 100 million for taxes, 100 that's about 10% or 1%. Then you got to add that to how much we're spending on the budget. And all you're doing, if you're going above like that 6% growth rate in particular, is you're accelerating the date of having to build a budget that will only grow about 3%. 3% over the long term might be too austere. In the near term, given the budget uncertainty and the end of administration, may be more appropriate, particularly since the legislature created a new funding approach to the base recurring budget. And that is, you don't automatically start a new program in the base recurring budget. You have to go prove its worth and its effectiveness through rigorous evaluation through a 3 to maybe 5-year pilot program before it gets into the base budget. So that's how the legislature was able to hold CYFD's budget flat last year. They said, all that stuff you want for that lawsuit that we're embroiled in, go prove that your strategies are going to work first. And they were funded through what's called the Government Results and Opportunity Fund. Next slide. Public schools. This is the biggest area that is probably holding us back economically, both in the short term for being able to attract businesses, being able to attract medical professionals to our state. If they look at our school system and say, well, I don't want my kids to go to school there, in addition to, you know, the real and perceived issues around crime and other stuff, those may all totally outweigh other things that might be going on in the medical profession or business industry. The schools represent about 43 to 44% of the overall spending pie. And like I said, they've increased spending over 70%. Next slide. Largely in response to that school finance lawsuit. That school finance lawsuit started in 2014, and really it was an outgrowth of some efforts to increase school spending and change the funding formula dating back all the way to 2008, where basically a task force said, how much do we need in order to educate the kids that go to school in New Mexico that are disproportionately from low-income families, learning English? What are the key things that we need to do? And that study found that what the state needed to do was kids benefit from a longer school year, more school. When they're in school, they do great. They benefit from high quality teaching. They would benefit from preschool types of things. So the school districts led this lawsuit, and then some other parent groups joined in back in 2014 and sued the state. By 2019, the court ruled that the inputs, again, this is, you know, years of austerity measures through the Great Recession, as well as by 2019, what people deemed as too austere through the Martinez administration and an oil bust where we were literally out of money, that the inputs, the funding and the programming were inadequate. And they made a causal link. Why are the inputs inadequate? We've got good national economists that say it's more about how you use the resources than the amount. But really the court said because the output, student outcomes are so dismal, the inputs must be insufficient. So they made a causal link between the two. And then the school system needed better oversight, where the state took more ownership over results. There's no specific list of things that the legislature is supposed to fund in the court order. They left some breadcrumbs saying kids do better when they're in school more. Kids do better if they get access to early childhood, particularly pre-K. Kids do better with good teachers, adequate instructional materials. And oh, by the way, schools need to follow the law when it comes to Indian Education Act, implementing English language learner services. And largely that's what the state has funded. So let's look at a little bit more of the performance data. Next slide. We know that on a snapshot basis, when we compare New Mexico to other states, we're 50th. We ask, what do we want fourth graders to be able to know and demonstrate, and what percentage of them can do it? And we're on the very low end of that when it comes to those types of proficiency rates or the average scores on the National Assessment of Education Progress. Next slide. And that's what this map designates. So these researchers in Stanford took all of the individual state assessment tests for kids in 3rd grade through 8th over almost a 10-year period and mapped them onto the NAEP to give us an apples to apples comparison. Blue, those are school districts that are below average. So that's not where you want to be. And that's where we know we're at in New Mexico, even in deep Mississippi, California, and some pockets of Arizona. Next slide. What the data, when you do that snapshot, doesn't tell you is how kids are doing when they're in school and how do they do year over year. The school system is designed to teach 3rd graders 3rd grade content and then move on to 4th grade. So we desire a year's worth of academic growth. And in places where you see green, that's what you're essentially getting. So the problem is that third graders are coming into third grade with the skill set and knowledge of a first grader. So we're not doing enough to help them catch up to the third grade standards. And when we see that kids get paired with two important variables, this is very simple in education: more time with better teachers. That's it. That's simple. And then the third I would put in there is a strong leader to organize that time and those teachers. So lots of different programs being sold out there. Those are the three key things that our research has found for turning the corner on educational outcomes. Next slide. We know there's huge gaps depending on kids' backgrounds and how much they attend school. Again, just chronic absenteeism rates. If you're not there, you're not learning. If your teacher's not there, it has an even bigger negative impact on learning. So if you see school districts pulling out teachers for professional development during the school year, their kids are taking a huge academic hit as opposed to doing your teacher training during the summer. Next slide. And this just shows the gaps between kids that are not on free and reduced lunch and not learning English. The same cohort of kids that started school in third grade were reading at 46% proficient. By the time they got to 11th grade, they were at 58%. But kids that were learning English and were from low-income families started at 8% and were failing them. By the time they got to 11th grade, less than 6% of them could demonstrate proficiency on reading. The largest proportion of kids are just low-income kids. And even that group made almost a 10 percentage point gain over that period of time, but still less than a third could demonstrate proficiency. When you think about the fact that they make up about 60 to 70% of all kids in the state, that's not cutting it. We got to do dramatically better for kids to come out of our K-12 system career and college ready. Next slide. Again, attendance levels are associated with proficiency rates. Next slide. And sometimes this may seem overly daunting, like these challenges are too big for the state, even though we've got a lot of resources. So we ask a lot of questions around what if. And this is a lot of data that's not good outcome data, but we say, well, what if we want to be at the national average for high school graduation? Turns out you'd only need to graduate 2,200 more students on time. Don't water down the curriculum. Don't just pass them out. Help them. And if you break that down by high school, it's like, why can't we get 40 more students out of Santa Fe High on time? Why is that unmanageable? Or 6 from like a Pecos. So breaking down our challenges to bite-sized chunks, having vastly upgraded our leadership capacity to be able to organize using more learning time and better teaching, you can see how very quickly you can turn the corner with some of these outcomes. Same thing for our college graduation rates. And I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt of graduating them in 6 years rather than 4 years. They call themselves 4-year colleges up here, but then they want to be measured on 6-year graduations. We're 50th in that. But if we want to be a mid-pack state, we'd only need to graduate 1,000 more students on time. That's manageable for a UNM. How can you get 300 students to graduate in 4 years rather than 4.5 or 5? 200 for NMSU as an example. Next slide. And this just gives you more data on the what if. Next slide. Okay, so to wrap up, it looks like we've got a good amount of time for questions, which I like, the Q&A. We've got booming revenues during this decade, but flattening out, which means we got to really ramp up our excellent use of those revenues to get better results for our economy and our population. And we talked about the 3 big buckets that the LFC's focused on. Otherwise, we're going to be heading at the end of the decade, beginning of the next decade, to very serious budget challenges. Medicaid is always a big challenge. Right now, we've got a little bit of relief because the Medicaid rolls have fallen so much and are likely to continue falling because of HR 1. We don't want them to become uninsured and clog up the rest of the healthcare system with uncompensated care. So we need to be smart about how to make sure people maintain coverage options. If we're going to make huge investments in early childhood, or those are the investments that are going to help pay off for people's earned income? Are more people going to be able to be employed because of these investments? Will their kids have a two-generational effect down the road? If not, is that something that should be a priority? And throughout the budget, we have to be much more laser focused, and I think we've set up to do that on strategically funding target on things that actually work. Make sure that they're implemented effective before committing ongoing resources towards them, and continue our continuous quality improvement process, monitoring those things and making adjustments if they're not, or if they're not, getting rid of it. With that, I'd be happy to move on to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And what a great presentation. I mean, so much good data and good facts. And I really appreciate your ability to tell a story around the data and the facts. I also like how you laid out the trends for like money coming in, coming out, going out, just, where you simply said something's got to give, right? I like that summary there. So let's open it up for Q&A. As Jeremy noted earlier, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can here in the remaining time. For our first question, though, I'm pleased to have Bruce Stidworthy here. What question do you have for Charles, Bruce?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Charles, for joining us today and sharing this information. I'm going to ask you a question that your comments touched on quite a bit, and I think that you also spoke to last time you presented to us, and that is that oil and gas, as you noted, is a big part of our revenue, but you had a chart that showed it declining, I think, starting sometime in the 2030s. What strategies should New Mexico be implementing now to ensure fiscal stability when these revenues inevitably decline? And I think you said before that one of the strategies that we have been employing, and we all know this, is putting money into permanent funds and trust funds. So how effective do you think that's going to be in the long term? What else should we be doing? And what do you think about those who say that we should be throwing more money at our immediate needs instead? So yeah, there's three parts there. If you need me to go back over those three questions, I can, but go ahead.
Great. I think we've done a lot of good when it comes to the permanent fund strategy. I'm generally not recommending more of those, particularly trying to capitalize it out of our cash that we've got coming in. Where we've been able to capitalize those in big ways is by diverting revenue that's coming in at levels that we couldn't even forecast. So that's how the Early Childhood Trust Fund, which was capitalized with $300 million, again, that's $300 million you don't have available for today's spending because you're saving it for tomorrow. But once we diverted those excess oil revenues into it, it's projected to grow to $10 billion. When we cook that up over here in the basement, we'd hope to get to $1 billion by the end of the decade. So that there's a lot of money that's going to be set aside for tomorrow. So I think we're set up good. Like I said, the permanent funds, spending money back into the general fund, that investment income could outpace our direct energy revenues by the end of the decade. So providing a huge, nice, steady stream, not volatile, and larger than our energy revenues. But, if those are coming in at 5 to 6% a clip, maybe a little bit more, that'd be great. Our problem is our severance tax permanent fund is underperforming, and we got to do better with getting better returns on that because that's a big nest egg. So I think we really are shifting to today's needs and making sure that we're laser focused on the best use of today's dollars to solve today's problems. We're taking care of largely for tomorrow. And a good example of that is the medical school at UNM, where we have an opportunity. This will be one of the biggest capital projects that we've done probably since the Big I. It's about $600 million they're looking at. They want to double the capacity of the teaching portion of the medical school. That will come with benefits from increasing the clinical care and training portion that will go on at the new hospital tower in the hospital. And it will increase our research capacity, which is looking a little precarious right now, to be honest with you. But over the long term, it's probably a good bet. That project has had solid leadership, and they've done it right. The Health Sciences Center put their own skin in the game with their own money to start the programming, the research. What does this look like? Meeting with us as staff on a frequent basis, legislators. Is this going to be a good ROI? It's not going to produce huge numbers of doctors that'll be practicing in New Mexico. From the MD standpoint, the huge benefit will be from the residencies and the capacity to support all those residencies with the larger medical school. That will be significant. And then seeking money for planning and the more in-depth design, continuing to update the committee on that. And we've come up with a plan as staff to be able to fully fund this over the next 3 years this session. They should be breaking ground this month. It's going to transform the corner of University and Lomas over the next decade as they build a new outpatient facility coupled with that hospital tower. I've talked to them about visionary things like if you're going to have all these doctors and medical professionals that you need to staff these places, where in the world in Albuquerque are they going to live? So thinking about public-private partnerships for condo high-rises, hotels. I mean, we have a real opportunity at that area of the campus to continue to be visionary and execute it. And that's the kind of things that I see when good leadership can be combined with these kind of resources that we've got available to actually meet the needs of New Mexicans, and New Mexicans to be able to see it and feel it over the next couple of years. So I'm really excited about that project.
Yeah, no, thank you, Charles. And Bruce, I like how you turned one question into three. Very smooth. Here's a topic that's top of mind given the state's economy and the environment. Kelly Mixon has this question. Kelly, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, Peter. And thank you, Charles, for taking time to be with us today. You touched on this a little bit with the CYFD program, but with the billions of dollars that are flowing into our state programs year after year, how can we create an environment where we're changing policies and structures to include a more rigorous approach to appropriations?
That's that pilot project type strategy that I talked about. Don't just put it into the base budget until they prove that it works. That's transformative. Nobody else is doing that in the country. And we've got the money to be able to set aside in what I call an expendable trust that the legislature's capitalized with the intent to spend down over the through the end of this decade to test out these things. There's not going to be much demand on that program, I predict, this session. But when you get a new governor come in, that's where we'll really have to put it to the test. And that's when the programs that have been funded this last session and the session before will be coming due with their evaluation research. And we want that research to be rigorous, to say that the intervention caused the outcome, not, we gave somebody a universal basic income and asked them if they liked it and they said yes. That's not rigorous research. We want to see something that's going to change the outcome for New Mexicans.
Great.
And whether the legislature will not fund those, and then how we can we'll be able to afford to build in that money into the base budget, because we're not creating a budget liability of more than 1%.
Thank you.
I'll step in here. Another topic here that affects many New Mexicans is the state of education. And Tom Antrim has our next question on education. Tom, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And Charles, I'll echo Kelly. Thank you so much for being with us today. And obviously you have been on the LFC education forefront for a long time and probably got a few gray hairs because of that. But what are your thoughts on our continued inability to comply with the Yazzie Martinez court order? And is it really, as some say, just a matter of spending more money?
No, I think we've spent plenty, to be honest with you. Um, the key is in the implementation. I'll give you a good example. So the court had negative findings about the state and how much learning time kids had. And remember, this lawsuit started with the school district saying, you're not giving us enough money to extend the school year. And what's been the dialogue from school districts since? Don't tell us what to do. But the legislature has funded the equivalent of a 205-day school year for elementary school students and the equivalent of a 190-day school year for secondary students. So that's one of the three legs that we talked about earlier. And that was a huge investment. You don't see very many, if at any, calendars at 205 days for elementary school. In fact, a lot of school districts will go to school for like 150 days. So what gives? How'd they do that? They managed in a succession of legislative sessions to convince the legislature to not make them go to school each day, but just count the instructional time in the form of hours. And so the system is now rigged where they added 15 to 20 minutes a day, which allows them to have a slightly longer day. And think about that as a 12-year-old. Think about that if it's us. How are we doing at 4:30 versus, just having an extra day of work? There's diminishing returns to that. But that's how they're getting around it. And so that gets to my point of implementation. Kids aren't really getting the value of what the legislature's funded in terms of more learning time. And there was leadership struggle to push out that initiative to work with teachers, families, and the loudest negative, smallest voices won the day. And so that's, a real challenge.
Yeah. Another perennial topic here is question is on infrastructure. Kevin Eads, do you want to raise your question? Bring up your question.
I do, thank you. And Charles, thank you. There's a few of us on here from NMSU, and we appreciate your Aggie math. You mentioned that we're fortunate to have multiple years of booming revenues and record surpluses and unspent revenue. Yet the backlog on road and bridge maintenance continues to grow. Communities still face boil water orders. The question is, how can the state finally prioritize its infrastructure spending so that it's game changing and we can look back in 20 years without regret at what we did not fix?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of ways we have made progress on our roads, but not enough to change the metrics. So, think about over the past 15 years, we've 6-laned I-25 from Bernalillo down to Isleta. We've replaced almost every major interchange. My staff tell me, well, that's heavy maintenance. That's what you're supposed to do. But there's progress there. There's not enough progress on the east side of the state on I-40. US 550 is needs a lot of work. And so what the legislature is doing has been supplementing the transportation budget with some of this surplus. And the challenge there is capacity constraints to be able to do more and achieve more when prices are going up so much. So we're almost like inflationary. By us putting more money into the system, it's almost like inviting more price increases. We're seeing this in capital outlay as well, where we're flooding the system. There's $7 billion in the pipeline that's not getting to work yet. And once we do get to work, I sit on the public school capital outlay, and we had 3 schools come up that are going to cost more than $50 million a pop for 50 kids each. And then another school with the same square footage that'll serve 350 kids at $50 million. So, I mean, our dollars aren't going far enough. But so a strategy is better alignment of projects with that supplemental funding, as opposed to taking out more debt, which the transportation department is proposing, which we've been underwater going back to GRIP 1 in 2003 as a result of that debt. Needing to make the power of the dollars that are generated for DOT keep up with inflation. No political will for a gas tax increase, one of the lowest in the country, maybe registration fees as an alternative. For water, a strategy that we've been publicly talking about with the committee is all these little water entities come to individual legislators to try to fund their water projects, and individual legislators don't have enough money to be able to do that. And so supplementing the Water Trust Board, which vets, has a good process for making sure that projects are shovel ready. Supplementing that was a strategy last session that I predict will be a future strategy to actually get these projects done in communities that are ready. And then investments in helping with technical assistance and capacity building for those systems that aren't quite ready to get up to speed and hopefully regionalize at least the operations, because trying to find that many water operators in many of these small systems will hamper operations as well as the foresight for capital planning. So those are a couple of different strategies.
Thank you for those insights, Charles. We do have a few questions in our chat, but before I open it up, I'd like to give Janice Torres an opportunity to ask one more question.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks, Charles, for the great presentation. So my question is in healthcare. Surprise, it's not about healthcare this time, but the elephant in the room, in the roundhouse, has to be crime and public safety. Do you see a smart way to invest in this area that will deliver a safer New Mexico?
We'll come out with a report that I encourage everybody to take a look at next week, where we try to follow a crime report to a disposition of a case. And it is a very complicated system with lots of independent actors, most of which are not at the state agency governor controlled level. They're independently elected mayors that oversee police departments, county commissions that oversee county sheriffs, DEAs that are responsible for prosecuting cases. So a lot of local things that are not necessarily state or governor controlled programmatically. So that's the challenge when it comes to funding these things, to be honest with you. And I think there just needs to be more organization and more coordination leadership at the local level to look at why aren't crimes being cleared? Why aren't people being arrested for those crimes? Our clearance rates for some types of crimes are really, really low. For others, they're pretty good. The police can file charges. The DA may or may not agree that they've got a strong enough case to move forward. That inhibits the system. There's a small number of people that are responsible for a disproportionate number of crimes likely, and they're continually cycling through the system because the system doesn't deal with them until they do something really bad. But as long as they're a low-level offender that's a nuisance to us, they're breaking into your business, they're stealing out of your car, they're not held accountable. But when they shoot somebody with the gun that they stole from somebody's car, they tend to be moved into prison rather quickly. But all of that other stuff before is tolerated by the system too much in what our research is finding.
Thank you, Charles. I'm just watching the time here, and I realized that we're close to an end here. So there were a lot of good questions. Some of them you answered, actually. Some of them we actually don't have, unfortunately, enough time, but I appreciate all the great questions in the chat room. For those that submitted questions, thank you. I'd like to ask Del Esparza from Esparza Digital for some closing comments here.
And folks are welcome to email me. You've got my email there.
Yeah.
And I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Thanks, Del. Del, you're on mute. Sorry.
I was off mute. I apologize for that. Peter, great job moderating this program. It's a great program. Charles, thank you for everything you did, and thank you for your accessibility to questions. This is a program that I look forward to every single year. Prepping for those for that legislative session, and so this is a good primer for that. So thank you so much, Charles, for the information. As a business community, we certainly believe that a cash flush state government is a good thing, and certainly better than other states are experiencing right now, and certainly better than the alternative, which we have experienced, as you indicated in your chart previously, far too many times. However, when the revenue is booming and everything over a multi-year period, it's tempting for everything to all of a sudden become a priority, especially for our state legislators. We hope that doesn't play out this upcoming session. We continue to believe that our significant capital spending should be better focused on rebuilding the foundations of our economy and communities. We don't want to look back 20 years from now and say, if we only had spent those infrastructure dollars more wisely. And with respect to our policy priorities, 3 issues come to mind, and all of these 3 issues are issues that you've addressed. I appreciate it, Charles. But they are tied to our long-term health of our economy, and they are the shortage of doctors and other healthcare workers in our state, a need for stronger academic performance in our public schools, and crime, specifically a justice system that has made it far too easy to commit criminal acts and get away with them, as you just referenced in the last question. Our ability to support and attract businesses and workers is tied specifically to having real access to healthcare, to educational options that deliver for our kids and families, and for safe homes and streets. We live in such a wonderful place here in Albuquerque and in New Mexico, but these are big, big challenges, and they have hung around our state for far too long. You showed a chart earlier, Charles, going back to the 50s, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if we were facing these challenges back then, and I suspect we probably were at that point. But it's time to push back these challenges, and it's time to push back on these problems. I'm going to be optimistic here because I'm an optimistic type of a guy, and I think that with focus and yes, the surplus that we have, we can get it done. So with that, thank you, Charles, and I'll give it back to you, Peter. Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Del. And I think, Charles, I speak on behalf of a lot of people that joined us here today. I think we appreciate your work, and I think we are very fortunate to have you in that role. So thank you for that as well. Thank everybody for attending our podcast here today, and special thanks to our sponsors. I'd like to maybe highlight 3 more events that we have coming up in the next couple of months. First one is our holiday reception on December 10th at the Marriott Pyramid North and then secondly, the Bernalillo County membership meeting on January 8th in the new year at the Sheraton Uptown. And then we will have a post-legislative membership meeting with our governor once the legislative session is over. And until then, have a safe and happy holiday season. Thanks for joining us.